Now, while he's passing this out, I'd like to comment on the sermon today. What was interesting in the sermon today is it illustrated, and you were sort of talking around this, it illustrated a principle of Paul Robbie, my colleague from St. Louis faculty, who said that, and this is a really good insight, that Yahweh in the Old Testament is Jesus in the New Testament. In other words, Jesus takes on the functions of Yahweh, such as walking on the water, leading his people, shepherding his people. The Lord is my shepherd, then Jesus is my shepherd. See? Feeding people in the wilderness, Yahweh does. Jesus feeds people in the wilderness. So, what's really interesting about this is the complexity that is immediately introduced in the New Testament, in the Gospels, in this. Jesus performs all the functions of Yahweh, the Lord God, of Sebaot, of the armies. And then he addresses God as his Father. So now you immediately have the beginning of what you might call of Trinitarian thinking. Namely, Jesus being God, and here's the way I say it in Mark commentary, Jesus being God, but not so exhaustively that God is only in Jesus. And that now introduces Trinitarian thinking. It starts out binitarian with the Father and the Son, and then soon the Spirit becomes an issue with this. But I thought you were really kind of dangling that in front of us today. Jesus, and so what happened in a sense is you leaped ahead 3 centuries, to a only begotten Son of the Father. That's as the cogitation starts to take form. But the way you described it was really good, because you've got God sort of dropping in on the scene, except we know this isn't all there is. And now the church has to think about it. But because that's the case, as Larry Hurtado says, thinking about the divinity of Jesus and what you would call theology in that sense, Christology and theology, is not late with a low Christology at first, that he's just a man, and a slow developing understanding. No, it's early, fast, and high. See, it's early, fast, and high, which means that very early on, very quickly, you get a high Christology of Jesus being the Lord God Sebaot. But now you have to consider, what does that mean when he addresses God as his Father? So now your intra-Trinitarian cogitation starts. But it starts right in the first 3 verses from the Gospel of Mark, where you have Mark, just right out of the gate, saying, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight. Well, who's he talking about? Yahweh. That's who it is in Isaiah 40. And he applies it to Jesus. Just like that. I mean, the profundity of that is stunning, if you think about it. Yeah.
And no direction from the Holy Spirit.
Oh, but yes, I'm not thinking that. It's just kind of thinking about this. Yeah.
But the point in this one is that none of that is mentioned in this pericope.
Right.
All we got is, who is this guy who stills the wind and the wind and the sea obey?
All right.
They got to do some figuring out here. That was the
Now, that's the second point I was going to build on from the sermon. Look at page 2. Take a look at page 2 of the outline. That's reading on level 2. You see? Because it doesn't say so in so many words. See? So you have to read the deeds. And what are the deeds? The deeds are Jesus' control over the winds and the waves. So that's what we were talking about is reading on level 2. You're not reading on level 1. Remember, level 1 is in so many words. You're reading the deeds otherwise. Now, hey, Sarah, where's your husband? I want to refer to him here, and he's got to get back in the room. But we now have two people who have taken the challenge and purchased Hans Fry, The Eclipse of Biblical Narrative. Does he have it there?
No, he gave it to me. It's in my bag at home.
Yeah.
Because I'm reading it on vacation.
You better be reading it on vacation. That is not vacation reading.
No.
But Jim's got it. Jim's got The Eclipse of Biblical Narrative, one of the most significant books of theology in the second half of the 20th century. Hans Fry. And Jim has worked through, the first 50 pages.
Didn't get it, I'd like to go back.
Right. Come on in here, Holman. I'm trying to commend you. We have two people who are reading Hans Fry. This is fantastic. So, believe it or not, Jim Krause has bought his.
He has mine.
Yeah, I know. He said he's not reading it yet. So.
Well, I got this from him.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, how did you fix the bridge? You got J.L. Austin. Yeah.
That's the pastor's.
Yeah. Oh, outstanding. Outstanding.
So he actually has this in his library, and he has the other one in his library right now to take with him on vacation.
Does it show any signs that he actually opened it?
I'm most surely, it may not show, but I most surely did because I wrote a paper on it.
Yeah, there's some traces on the Bible.
Okay, good. Mike, I'm so pleased that you got that, and Jim also. Remember, the first 50 pages, read it twice if you have to, because that sets the pace. Okay, that's about the reversal of fit, which is, in the traditional view, we fit our world into the world of the Bible, and with the coming of the Enlightenment, the reversal of fit takes place where we fit the Bible into our world. And once that happens, everything goes into the Bible. So that is the baseline of historical critical method. But this is great. Now, by the way, for you guys, the new Greek people and so on, Michael Holman is our best organist in sin. Okay, just realize this: everything he was doing up there was improvisation. Okay, so when he's got those various versions of the hymns, there is not any music for them. All right, please come back. You gotta hear it every Sunday. Okay. So, as unbelievable as this may seem, we are going to page 3. Yes, we do at least 1 page a month. Now, this is going to be good. Understanding the process. We're doing a basic hermeneutics course now. Okay? And we're talking basically about how textual interpretation works. And so this is very significant at the top, understanding the process to texts. So, of all the things we've said, if you get nothing else out of this course, you'll avoid wasted your time. No. If you get nothing else out of your course, this is probably the most important thing. And that is that when you interpret any text, you are simultaneously interpreting two texts. So here you have the target text, let us say Gospel Mark. When you are reading the signifiers, the marks on the page, and then those elicit images in your mind, and you read those images, Jesus stilling the storm, or walking on the water, or making bread, interpreting on level 2, and so forth. You do so essentially by bringing it into relationship with yourself as, so to speak, I'm going to put this in quotes, a second text. That is to say, the interpreter is a complex of understandings, beliefs, ideas, and these are brought to bear upon the signifiers on various levels in the target text. I'd rather put it in the following way. When you read a text, you read it, so to speak, over against your understandings, yourself as text, your beliefs, your understandings, your attitudes. There is, interpreting a text is not like this. Dumping coins out of a coin purse. That is not what happens in the interpretation there. It is more like assembling the pieces of a puzzle. And you have an understanding that, and let's use this as a term, that engages the signifiers that you see on the page. Now, Katie Bell, this is absolutely critical in terms of sort of literary theory or something like that, because this is why different people read the same text differently. It's not like the signifiers change. It's that the second text changed. So that when the signifiers on the page are brought into conjunction with one's own understandings and so forth, that looks different if you have different people. Now, in fact, watch what I'm going to do here. In fact, this is what happens when you read and understand the text. But we would say then, concomitantly, the reverse happens when we apply a text. Then I understand myself over against the text. Okay? Then I put myself and my beliefs, my attitudes, my understandings, my faith over against what the text is saying. But it's always a two-text process. It is never this. Right? That is not how interpretation happens. That the text just hits you. In order for it to, you always have to take your glasses off. I mean, it's expensive if you don't. But, you know, for example, this is why people will say something like the following. After my wife died, I had a new understanding of the Psalms. Well, the Psalms didn't change. Nobody changed the signifiers. See, what happened is the second text changed. And suddenly now, you see, for example, different meaning-producing dimensions in the text. Now, this is why I'm going to be going through all kinds of stuff this morning related to this. And we're going to get on here in just a second about whether there's any control on any of this stuff. Okay? But please understand that that interpretation is actually a process and a kind of an assembly activity. And thus, the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more you see, and so forth. I mean, I'll just give you, it is fortunate, folks, that we happen to have in our midst today Greek students, because their teacher, John Nordling, disagrees, improperly I might say, with my Greek book on the nature of the Greek verb. Okay? Now, the Nordling view differs from the Voelz view. Okay? When we read texts having an imperfect indicative, or you'll get this in chapter 16, a present imperative as opposed to an infinitive, as opposed to an aorist infinitive. If you have one theory of how the Greek verbal system works, as opposed to this other theory of how the Greek verbal system works, all of a sudden the text means something different. The text didn't change. See? The theory in the second text changed by which you were interacting with this. So you can't, in other words, it's just not possible to do something like this. Just let the text speak. Well, the text doesn't say one darn thing until you activate it. Otherwise, all you got are ink marks on paper. So until you begin interacting with it, there is no meaning to that text. And then, remember the verbs we've used in this? Meaning arises from the text as you interact with that text. It evokes meaning from you, but meaning arises in the interaction. Now, I'm really happy to be able to say this with you guys, because this business of the different understanding of Greek verbal system, which, by the way, almost everybody disagrees with me about in the scholarly world. They happen to be wrong. But there are big discussions in the Society of Biblical Literature about this, in the Greek language and linguistics section. Okay? So the big guy, famous guy, is Stanley Porter, a guy named Stanley Porter. Another guy named Louis Fanning has a slightly different view. Nordling has a kind of a more traditional view, and so on. Well, there are probably, like, say, 5 different ideas of the Greek verbal system floating around. Well, how much more basic can you get than the nature of the language as such? You know, something like that. And all of those differences not encourage, but engender differences of meaning. Now, there'll be nuanced sort of meaning, you know. It isn't something like, I think something means tree and it actually means locomotive, it's not like that. There'll be nuanced kind of stuff, but there will be differences. See, there will be differences. And it's all on here. Let me put this down here. So this is the so-called text. All right, it's all differences in second text that occasion these kinds of things. Now, I'll have to say, that this wouldn't be so exclusively. For example, arguments about textual criticism are arguments about the nature of the signifier set. Right? So if I'm arguing about text criticism, and I am or am not reading the pericope of a woman taken in adultery, the actual target text changed. But it's not, but I'm still making the judgments on it. This is the thing you have to, you have to kind of realize how interactive absolutely everything about the interpretive process actually is. Now, this brings up, if you go down on page 3, we're going to skip around just a little bit. This brings up point of,
I wanted to step back a moment and...
Oh, by the way, in your field, the binyanim,
Yes.
okay, see, there's differences on that whole business of, whether something, like say, what is the nature of the nifah, right? There's problems with that as well as the PM. So, again, those are problems on this side of the text. Okay, go ahead.
From our perspective, it sounds like, who's our?
You and your
our
wife?
modern perspective,
Okay.
and most people, other than the people who sat down and examined the problem, would say, well, isn't grammar basic to language? It is, but the grammar we study of ancient languages is not primary, it's secondary.
Yeah.
The only thing we have is the text. And I assure you, Abraham and Paul did not sit around with the grammar of Hebrew or Greek and say, how do I want to say this? They simply said it. And we have to figure out from what we have, the corpus, how the grammar is being used. That's why different people can come up with different understandings.
Well, that's exactly right. And so grammar is a kind of a derivative state, from this. But just realize, it isn't only because we're reading a foreign language or a dead language or an old language. Even today, okay, let me, were you Austin? Yeah, let me pick Austin here. Now watch this. Austin, what does, I gotta get the right word here. Disinterested. Not interested. Okay? So you talk about like a child is disinterested in class. Right? Okay, something like that. All right, now, that's not the dictionary definition.
Lost interest.
What?
Lost interest.
No.
Unbiased.
Unbiased. Disinterested in the dictionary will give you as its first meaning unbiased, having no interest in either side of a debate. As I heard it once on the BBC over in England, they said it this way. If a judge has his own son on trial, he must be disinterested, but he can never be uninterested in the outcome. Okay? However, what's happening today is that disinterested is coming to mean uninterested. All right? So this is a living language, see? And so he's speaking, Austin is speaking his own dialect here, as opposed to, well as the dialect of everybody else in the United States, except me and Jim Krause.
Grammar, dictionaries are all secondary.
Yes, yeah, they're all secondary, you know, whether or not that's an old language or something that we're reading and, you know, somebody's reading linear B or something like that. It doesn't have to be like that. Yeah. Well, this is, thank you very much, Richard. That is absolutely outstanding. And, I mean, look at it like this. Also, as long as you're bringing it up, nobody learns, it's going to sound so stupid when I put it this way, but it really is true. Nobody learns Greek from the Bible. See, you learn Greek from an instructor, from another book, from somebody else speaking it to you. But you don't learn the Greek, you know, to hit myself again with that thing, does not kind of come off the page at you like this. And then now you know the hina clause. You know, it doesn't, you have to actually sort of study that. And this is all external to the text of the Word of God. Everybody's just got to realize that. Nobody is, quote, just reading the text. It doesn't work like that. And of course, the proof of all this is that this is why there's so many arguments about what anything means. Because the second texts are all different. Now, go down to 3C. The fact that there are two texts involved in the reading of any one text means that there is no such thing as objectivity in the interpretation of the text. There is no, just a minute, hold on. This means that there is no objective reading of a text. Jim Krause. That is the failure of modernism. Thinking that there was. So, what do we mean when we say what would that be? An objective reading of a text. An objective reading would include these factors. Standing completely apart from the text. Observing the features of the text without involvement. And observing these in this detached way without affecting what is observed. That would, so standing apart, separate completely, observing without involvement, and observing without affecting what is observed. And so if you were, this is what would be called an objective reading. If you were to do this, it would then lead to an assertion, something like this. That you could describe the features and the characteristics of a text, of anything, of a text, apart from a specific context and apart from the involvement of an observer. Let me say that again. So if you have an objective view of reality, you are asserting that you can describe the characteristics or features of anything, including a text, apart from its contextual frame and without the involvement of an observer, which is exactly wrong. There is no way to describe anything except contextually and with the participation of an interpreter. Now, we are thinking big thoughts here, okay? This is the essence of postmodernism. The essence of modernism is against all the stuff that I'm talking about right now. In other words, that there are features anywhere, including in a text, that exist non-contextually, that can be observed and described without the involvement and the effect of an observer. Jim? Hans Fry starts getting into this. See? And Germans have never gotten to this point. Okay? Germans are ineluctably modernists. They believe that you can do objective assessment of data and features apart from a contextual situation and apart from the involvement of an assessor or an interpreter.
It's because it's a theologische Wissenschaft.
It's Wissenschaftlich! Ja, mein Herr! Es ist doch wissenschaftlich. Thank you. Exactly. Now, the frogs aren't much better because here's the thing. The Germans think that this is all kind of out there in the matter. The French are Platonists, so they believe that there are ideas apart from human observation and so on like that, that are pure, sort of platonically, like in the realm of thought and so on. And what we're talking about here, inevitably, arises in the English-speaking world from the U.S. and Britain, which has this long tradition of sensible realism, philosophical. But what I'm saying here right now is the most important thing that I have said so far and will say with anything that we have been talking about with our basic little hermeneutics course, is to understand that there is no such thing as objective interpretation. And that's because there is no such thing as the objective observation of anything. Now, this doesn't mean that everything is just being invented or is a crapshoot or anything like that. We're going to go on and talk about this. But I want to establish this point. And again, I'm going to come back to saying, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, which is, this is why people differ about the most fundamental interpretation of anything. Because all interpretation is a two-text process. It is a process. Now, yeah, go ahead.
Apply that just a little bit. For example, Luther and Zwingli. And they are, they're arguing about the meaning of the Lord's Supper. And
I'm going to get on to Holy Communion. Okay? Yeah. It happens to be a really good case for this. All right? It's coming a little further down the pipe.
Okay.
All right? Very good. Now, this next part then builds on this. Therefore, do not seek to interpret texts having no presuppositions. Why? That is impossible. Even, Richard, thank you for that reminder always, even as basic as your presupposition about the Greek word. Okay? Somebody's going to have a presupposition about that. You cannot do reading of Hebrew, reading of Greek with no presuppositions. So what's the solution? You got to have the right presuppositions, not no presuppositions. See where we're going? Yes. This is huge, folks. This is really huge. And the church has always known this. Well, I should say, it's known it up to the time of Spinoza. See? Once you hit that, all of a sudden, everything changes. But the church has always known that if your brain isn't right about what you're doing with the text, you don't get the right view of what the text is saying. Now, what's our job as hermeneutics is to try to figure out what this means practically for us, well, theoretically and practically. Yes, theoretically and practically. Did I tell the class that this great, Paul Robinson's got this great shirt from the University of Chicago. This, Doug, I think this fits you too. You got to get this for Doug. This shirt that says, "That's fine in practice, but how does it work in theory?" So we got to try to figure out what we're doing here. So if we have the right presuppositions, how are we to understand this? Okay? Mike, new diagram.
Okay.
Literary theory is helpful. Now, this is a diagram of what it means, what is involved in interpreting, let us say, a narrative like the Gospel of Mark. This outer box is what you might call the real world outside the text. Now, we can argue about that, but we don't need to argue about that right now. Number one is the so-called real author, the guy who actually penned the book. Number 5 is a real reader. So that would be somebody actually picking up the text of, let us say, Mark or Galatians or something like that. I'll tell you what I'll do, let me change color here just to make this a little bit easier. I'm going to do the same thing. But since Marge was good enough to get me multicolored markers, this. Okay. Now, the green one is the text, and I'm going to put it like this. The text as signifier set. So in other words, Jim, it's the marks on page. All right? So it's, or you can put it like this, the physical book. It's the physical book. Now, what's number 3? 3 is, so to speak, you know, Marge, as long as you got these different color pens here, let's do this. 3 is the story that arises in your mind when you read the physical marks on the page. Now you notice I did this as a cloud. That's my own version of this, because if you get this in some literary theory classes, they will often have the third box interior with sharp angles like the other two. But I don't think that's right, because the story changes every time you read it. You know, you read it, you see some new stuff or something like that. Okay, so 3 is the story. Now what's critical about this, and I'm going to use all Marge's colors here. What's critical about this are numbers 2 and 4. Number 2 is the so-called implied reader. Sorry, the implied author, sorry, on the wrong side. Implied author. That is to say, now listen, I'm going to do this. When 5 in the real world encounters the box green, and 3 arises in the mind of 5, he constructs in his own mind 2 and says something like this. Paul was really mad when he was talking to the Galatians. Or Paul, as he was talking, you know, we can look here and see that Paul personally had some development in his life and so on like that. Now, you have no idea whether 2 and 1 are actually totally congruent. Because 2 is the image that the author projects in the text. 1's the real author. Well, I mean, you know, a real good example of this is you take Katie, you know this. Who was the actual author with the nom de plume, George Eliot? It's a woman.
I don't remember really.
Silas Martin, I don't know.
Yeah, anyway, George Eliot is the nom de plume of a woman. But if you were reading this probably early on, the number 2 of the book would be a guy. Well, it's not really. 1 isn't a guy. So the critical thing here is the implied reader, the implied author is constructed, so to speak, by the real reader. All
Mary
right.
Ann Evans.
What's that?
Mary Ann Evans.
Mary Ann Evans. Okay. Now, here comes the big kicker. It's all about 4, which is the implied reader. So now listen to how I'm going to do this. 1 seeks to address 5 real readers. 1 does so through the green box. and the green box eliciting a story, which is the cloud number 3. But one does so by constructing in his mind 4. The implied reader. So the implied reader is that person, that man or woman, who has the competencies, the abilities to activate the cloud number 3. So in other words, when Mark writes the Gospel of Mark, he's assuming that 4 has the ability in Greek. He's also assuming that 4 is not completely adept in Aramaic because he translates Talitha Kum. What's that?
We'll learn about next week.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're jumping in.
Yeah. Right. All right. Let me give you some basics on that curriculum. No, you're going to be preaching on it. Okay. So, in other words,
You can critique the sermon afterwards.
and we will. No, listen. This is great. No, I'm confident. You think about this stuff. This is what I like about you. Okay. So, 1 has an image of 4 that he's writing to. Okay? So now here comes the kicker. Here comes the kicker. We are letting the other shoe go. Okay? You properly read a text as number 5 by adopting the contours of 4. So you want to become the implied reader. This is what reader response critics would say. You want to become the implied reader of the text in order to do a reading that is congruent with the intentionality of the author. Now that means you guys are learning Greek. You're going to be learning Hebrew. You're going to be learning about the Greco-Roman world. You're going to be learning about other gods and so on. Learning about the emperor. So, in order to be the implied reader, you gotta know a bunch of stuff. And you have to have certain competencies, like linguistic competencies. Okay? But part of number 4, though, part of number 4 is also, for the Bible ed, personal faith. See? So, you have to have knowledge, and if you think in terms of confession, like Jesus as Lord, you're holding, and this would be part of, similar to knowledge, personal beliefs about things, okay? And then you would have personal faith that is a component of that. Now, we're getting to the end of the time, and I'm going to, so next week, I'm going to talk about number 4, and about the role of the Holy Spirit and faith, and how that all works relative to interpretation. But let me end today, Doug, come back to your point. See, Lutheran Zwingli had different views, not only about the sacrament, they had different views of the nature of Christ, and they had differing views about the nature of language. Now, all of these things mean that they have 2 second texts coming at the first text of, let's say, this is my body. Well, all of a sudden, you see the darn thing differently. And you're arguing about that. Now, the reason we're taking the time to pull the threads here is once you realize what I'm talking about, it helps you in dialogue. because you know what you're looking for. See, you're saying, oh yeah, second text is a little different there. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not like this, not like this. I'm doing objective reading of the text. You're imposing your own theory. No, no, no. We're all coming with the second text. Now we got to see how we can get that congruent, how the second text of 5 can be congruent with 4. Now I might just say, Katie Beth, this would be relevant to the work that I'm sure you will do at some point. There is such a thing that literary critics will call, especially deconstructionists, reading against the grain. Reading against the grain means I know that 1 through 3 wants me to become 4, but I'm not going to surrender to that. See, I am not going to allow the text to determine my attitudes to activate the signifiers of the green box. I'm going to activate them with other understandings to show, for example, how the author didn't have it completely under his control or something like that. But reading against the grain could be defined as refusal to adopt 4. Okay? Refusal to adopt 4. And reading the green box on one's own or with other presuppositions, something along those lines. So, in other words, you're getting at something like, and Doug, you know, I'm really glad you brought that up, because nothing beats the words of communion as an example of this, and I'm going to go not to language, because it actually didn't write on that. It wrote on Christology. See, so if you don't believe that Jesus as the incarnate Son of God could be omnipresent, and you don't believe that because you believe that his human nature restricts his divine nature. So, the genus myostaticum says, the second genus of the communication of attributes, says that the divine nature communicates its characteristics to the human nature. But the question is, does the human nature have its characteristics which are limiting? Do they also go on to the divine nature so that they limit the divine nature? This is called having reciprocity in the second genus. Now, Lutherans have always confessed that there, as you would say, Lois, is no reciprocity in the second genus. Okay? So that the divine attributes affect the human nature, but the human attributes, such as limitation, ignorance, and so on, do not limit the divine nature. Now, let's finish here with the invocation of Pastor Punky, which is on the matter of the words of institution. If in my second text I believe that there is no reciprocity in the second genus, and Zwingli does, the text looks different. And nothing happened in hoc est corpus meum, or tu ta est in ta somus So, it's quite incredible here how the person as second text affects actually what you see, Richard, on level 1. Okay? So it's not just like a theologizing or something, but actually what you see on level 1. So next time what we'll do is I want to talk about fides quae, the faith which is believed, and fides qua, the faith by which we believe, 2 aspects of faith, and how that impacts interpretation, because there is sort of control on all this, but it's a different kind of control than most people think it is. Most people think that the control is reading objectively. First of all, there is no reading objectively, And secondly, any such supposing would never put anything, have any control on anything. Okay, now I have to subside here. But are there any last questions or comments or anything? Yeah.
Just that last statement was extraordinary, that the attitude of the person actually changes the signifiers themselves.
Yeah.
And I have a perfect example of this. Marge and I, when we go home, I go to my home congregation. Marge takes her mother
Yeah.
to her mother's congregation.
Yeah.
And there, while doing that, they're having the Lord's Supper. And they don't have it very often, but they had it this time. And there the pastor says that this is what Jesus said, take, eat, this symbolizes my body.
Is that right?
He said those very words, hello, but it changes the signifier.
Yeah.
It changes the signifier there.
No, that is exactly correct. So, and see, the reason that the words of institution are so interesting, and by the way, we can talk about this more next week, but when I was doing the words of institution for the second volume of my commentary, I was happily surprised in looking over. I looked at the dialogue between Luther and Zwingli. I was happily surprised how sophisticated Luther was on this. He didn't just say is always means is, because he dealt with it contextually, which was a very interesting thing. But your understanding, and thank you for bringing us back to this, because this is actually a very important point. One's second text, second text understanding, actually affects something as basic as the grammar. See, it isn't just this, that it affects your theology. Well, obviously it affects your theology, but it affects stuff as basic as the grammar. And that's going to affect all kinds of stuff. John 9:3, 2 or 3. Who sinned? Hinna, this man be born blind. Is that a result clause with the result that, or is it a purpose clause in order that he be born blind? Well, you're off to the races here, aren't you? And it all depends on how you understand him. That basic. Thank you, Doug. And thank you, Richard. That was, Jim, were you? Okay. All right, listen, thanks a lot, folks. This is